Welcome to the podcast summary of Persona 3. Persona 3 mattered because it didn't just tell a dark story about death. It built that idea into everything. Your school schedule, your friendships, your combat choices, even the way you summon power by pointing an evoker at your own head. And almost 20 years later, people are still debating which version is the definitive one, which says a lot about how unusual and durable the whole thing turned out to be. One of Persona 3's big breakthroughs was fusing a traditional RPG with a day-by-day school life simulator. Your time was split into limited daytime and evening chunks, so every choice had a little pressure built into it. Do you study, work on charm or courage, spend time with someone, or save your energy for Tartarus at night? That structure did more than add flavor. It made ordinary life feel mechanically important, which sounds obvious now, but at the time, it was a pretty bold shift. The social link system is where Persona 3 really changes the conversation. You build relationships with characters tied to the major arcana, and those bonds make future personas stronger. So your emotional life isn't off to the side from combat progression. It is combat progression. And the game could be surprisingly unforgiving about it. Bad dialogue, broken promises, even juggling romances carelessly could reverse or break a link, and that arcana could temporarily become unavailable in battle. What's clever is that this basically reworks the negotiation DNA from older Megami Tensei games. Instead of bargaining with demons, you're negotiating social bonds with people, and then converting those bonds into power. Persona 3's setting is still one of its strongest ideas. During the hidden 25th hour, ordinary people turn into coffin-like forms, and the school mutates into Tartarus, this huge, impossible tower. That's such a smart use of place. School is already where routine, pressure, and adolescence pile up, and the game turns that same physical space into a horror environment. It also ties back to the larger mythology. The Dark Hour comes out of the Kirijo Group's experiment 10 years earlier, when they tried to collect and harness shadows. That disaster split them into 12 major creatures, and Seize is manipulated into defeating those creatures, so the pieces can reunite and summon Nyx. A lot of games use death as a villain to punch, but Persona 3 goes somewhere harsher than that. Nyx is the external threat, sure, but the epilogue reveals that Erebus keeps being created by humanity's unconscious desire for death and all the despair that gathers around it. So Makoto's sacrifice isn't a clean final victory. He becomes the great seal that stops humanity's despair from calling Nyx back. That changes the emotional shape of the whole story. The threat can be held back, but the conditions that create it never fully disappear. That's a much sadder, more human idea than simply saving the world and rolling credits. That's also why the answer matters to some players so much, even though it's divisive. Instead of undoing the loss, it makes the surviving cast confront grief directly. The conflict over whether to use the final key to return to the past becomes a fight over acceptance versus an impossible second chance. It's not exactly comfort gaming, but it is consistent. Persona 3 keeps insisting that pain can't always be edited out of the story. Combat had its own famous argument built in. In the original release, your party members were controlled by AI. Director Katsura Hashino defended that choice as a way to express each character's personality in battle. In practice, a lot of players remember it as the game where an ally made a baffling choice and somebody died for it. The underlying combat loop was still widely praised. Hit weaknesses or score crits, knock enemies down, chain extra turns, then pile on with an all-out attack. It has a really snappy rhythm. The downside was Tartarus itself, which many people found repetitive, even if the battle system stayed satisfying. Portable later added direct control, guard commands, and the ability for allies to take a fatal hit for the protagonist. That made things more predictable and more player-friendly, but it also moved the game away from that original experiment with limited control and party individuality. Then there are the Evokers, maybe the single most instantly recognizable image in the game. They're gun-like devices fired at the user's head to summon a persona, which is about as subtle as a brick through a window, but in this case, Subtlety was not the assignment. The imagery made mortality and self-confrontation brutally explicit. Reviewers called it shocking and edgy, but also perfectly matched to the game's tone. And despite how obvious the controversy risk seemed, Atlas kept the Evokers in international releases and reportedly didn't get any organized parental backlash. Persona 3 even got a 1-up award for being the most controversial game that created no controversy. It helps that personas themselves are framed as a second soul or alternate personality that emerges when someone faces something beyond ordinary reality. So the whole summoning mechanic works as a very literal metaphor for confronting the self. Persona 3 also arrived with a complete aesthetic identity. The blue menus, stylish character designs, anime cutscenes, mecha-like personas, and that headshot summoning imagery all fit together immediately. Shoji Meguro's soundtrack was a huge part of that. The prominent vocals from Yumi Kawamura and Lotus Juice gave the game a sound that stood apart from earlier Megami Tensei titles, and Mass Destruction stuck around after getting a stronger response than expected. The PlayStation 2's audio capabilities mattered here too. Meguro could use larger stream samples instead of wrestling with the original PlayStation's severe limits. So Persona 3 became a real technical and artistic step forward for him. That strong identity is part of why the game kept getting remade and revised instead of simply being left alone. First, the original, then FES with its epilogue, then Portable with a female protagonist and revised combat, then modern ports, then Reload. Each version made real trade-offs. FES added narrative closure through the answer, but that epilogue dropped the daily life sim. Portable added direct commands and the female protagonist, but replaced explorable spaces and animated scenes with a more visual novel-like presentation. Reload focused on remaking the original game, and at first left out both the female protagonist and the FES epilogue before Episode Aegis was added later as DLC. So, the release history has basically become its own argument over what Persona 3 actually is. The original structure, the extra story, the better combat, the alternate protagonist, or some impossible ideal version that contains all of it. What keeps Persona 3 alive is that it wasn't just stylish. It found ways to make systems, story, and imagery all push on the same themes at once. And for a game about despair, it's had a pretty remarkable afterlife. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.